The legal topic that I'm going to be discussing is corporal punishment. When we think of corporal punishment, we hear corporal, we hear punishment. We all know what punishment is. Punishment is just a consequence or an action or something that is implemented because of a bad behavior. It's a consequence. So, corporal punishment is also known as physical punishment. It's meant to cause physical pain to the person that's it's being inflicted on. So when a child receives corporal punishment, whether it be at home or at school, that's usually in the form of spanking or paddling. I know the school that I teach at enforces corporal punishment. Um, I know that in order for a child to receive corporal punishment, a parent must give their written permission to the school administrators to actually perform corporal punishment. Now, I am not sure if it is in the form of spanking or in the form of paddling. I know that when I was in school, which I went to a different school than the school I teach at, but they implemented paddling as a form of a disciplinary action. So, if corporal punishment is not permitted by law or school board policy, reasonable corporal punishment can be used as a disciplinary measure. So, what that means is if a law or a school board has not implemented a policy that permits corporal punishment, then it can be used in a school as a disciplinary measure. Many states have banned the use of corporal punishment by educators, either by a law or a regulation from the state. In 1971, there was only one state that prohibited the use of corporal punishment, and as of 2017, there are now 28 states that prohibit corporal punishment. Now, I have added a little visual over here to the side for you to look at. So it's coded with the green being the states that have legalized corporal punishment, it's allowed to use it, and then the blue are the states that have banned corporal punishment from being used. So if you notice, Georgia is a state that allows corporal punishment, it is legal. Now, there are a few concerns with corporal punishment. Some critics say that corporal punishment violates our right to safety, bodily integrity, due process, and our right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. Now, you will hear due process again, you will hear cruel and unusual punishment again, because later I'm going to discuss two court cases where both revolved around due process and the Eighth Amendment, which involves cruel and unusual punishment. Corporal punishment is not only meant to be physically hurtful, but it can also cause emotional damage, humiliation, and shame. And these are not short-term effects. These could be long-term negative effects that we are implicating on children. The Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment and has been an issue in some corporal punishment cases. If the Supreme Court concludes that a given activity does not impair federal constitutional guarantee, like corporal punishments in public schools, states and local school boards retain discretion in placing restrictions on the activity. So basically, corporal punishment is left up to local school boards and states. Okay, let's look at the pros and cons of corporal punishment. So we're going to look at the pro side first. So the first pro of corporal punishment is that corporal punishment is seen as the appropriate discipline for certain children when used in moderation. Hence the word moderation. Should corporal punishment be used every single day on a child? No. Now, could it be used every now and then as a disciplinary action? Sure. So occasional use of this is appropriate when there are significant behavior difficulties. Some people who support corporal punishment have said that timeouts or taking away a toy is not as effective as as corporal punishment is when correcting those bad behaviors, especially in a child who is prone to acting up, being willful, being rambunctious. The second pro of corporal punishment is that it sets clear boundaries and motivates children to behave in school. So basically, if children know that they are going to receive a physical punishment, a paddling, a spanking for the way they are acting, they are less likely to misbehave in the future. So when children know that there's going to be a penalty, they can make better decisions. They can have more self control. They can be more responsible for the way they're acting. And then the third pro is that corporal punishment is often chosen by students over suspension or detention. And typically, suspension and detention, both of those require the child to miss time that they could be in the classroom learning. Now, corporal punishment does as well, but again, corporal punishment is meant to be rapid. It could take all of 2 minutes and they're back in class. Detention, lunch detention for instance, that's 30, 40 minutes. Suspension, you're talking days, maybe even a week out of school. So when corporal punishment is used, the child's education is not disrupted. There's no need for makeup work or missing class because it's quick and then they're back. All right, let's look at the con side. So the first con of corporal punishment is that it can inflict long-lasting physical and mental harm on students. You have to understand that these students are being spanked, they're being paddled, and that could lead to having issues with aggression and attention in the future. Some researchers have also discovered that corporal punishment frequently increases the likelihood of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, tension, and other mental health issues. The second con of corporal punishment is that it can create an unsafe and violent school environment. And that is the last thing you want as a teacher, as an administrator, because many, many times I hear we need to promote a positive learning environment. And in order for a student to learn, they must like you, they must feel safe. If they do not feel safe in your classroom at school, they will not learn from you. And the third con is that corporal punishment is an inappropriate punishment that can harm the education of children. So there are some states that allow corporal punishment, and those states have been shown to do worse on academic evaluations at the national level than schools who do not practice or promote corporal punishment. And students who experience corporal punishment in kindergarten are more likely to have lower vocabulary scores in fourth and fifth grade. And just again, that's going back to this may have long-term negative effects. All right, let's look at our first court case. The first court case we're going to talk about today is the Ingram versus Wright. Now, this case was revolved around a 14-year-old boy named James Ingram, and he was an 8th grade student at Drew Junior High School in Miami, Florida. He was being boisterous in the school auditorium, and he was sent to the principal's office. When he arrived there, the principal decided that his punishment was going to be to hit him with a paddle 5 times. Now, James, the student, insisted he did nothing wrong. He shouldn't be punished because he didn't do anything wrong. After he refused, he was restrained by another teacher while the principal swatted him 20 times with the paddle. Now, while physical punishment was legal in this particular school district, James did have some physical injuries. He had bruises that kept him out of class for 10 days, and it even required medical attention. So James and his mother filed a lawsuit against the principal and other school administrators, saying that the paddling violated his 8th Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishments. Now, the ruling of this case, the Supreme Court actually ruled against James. So, according to the court, legitimate physical discipline at school does not violate the Constitution. It does not violate the 8th Amendment. It does not violate that's cruel and unusual punishment. So, the 8th Amendment was actually intended many, many years ago to protect criminals from harsh punishment at the hands of the government, not misbehaving kids at school. So the court did, however, instruct teachers and principals when using corporal punishment on a student that they should impose or they should use caution and prudence when using this disciplinary action. So the justices urged that school administrators assess the severity of the student's offense. Is this the first time this has happened? Is this a B student and they just had one bad incident, or is this a repeating process? Also, the student's attitude, previous behavior, how old are they, their conditions, and then the availability of a less severe form of discipline. Now, the impact of this case left the subject of corporal punishment up to individual states and local districts, which have established most education regulations when it comes to physical or corporal punishment. Currently, there are 22 states that allow corporal punishment, while 28 prohibit the use of corporal punishment. The next court case we're going to talk about is Hall versus Tawney, and this case actually was going on the same time the Ingram versus Wright case was going on, and the previously discussed case, Ingram versus Wright, actually had an impact on this case, even though this case came about before the other one. So this case involves a student, Naomi Hall from West Virginia, who claimed she was severely hurt after her teacher struck her repeatedly with a paddle as the school principal did nothing. Naomi and her parents sued the school, saying that her Eighth Amendment rights had been violated and that she had been denied procedural due process. She also claimed that she was denied substantive due process under 42 U.S. Code Section 1983, which states that a civil action may be launched for a violation of constitutional rights. Now, the ruling was that this case was pending, and another case came about, the one Ingram versus Wright, and thus dismissing the plaintiff's Eighth Amendment and procedural due process grounds in that case. That actually led to the ruling of this case. So in addressing the final constitutional claim, again, the United States Courts of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit ruled that disproportionate corporal punishment in public schools could violate a student's constitutional rights due process, subjecting school administrators to liability. The standard to be applied, the court ruled, was whether the force applied was to cause severe injury and disproportionate injury, and was basically inspired by malice rather than a careless or unwise excess of zeal that is amounted to a brutal and inhuman abuse of official power. So basically what they said is it had to be shocking to the conscience in order for it to be considered cruel and unusual punishment. The case was remanded to the lower court, and the plaintiff's Section 1983 claim could be tried in light of the Fourth Circuit's ruling. Now, this case did go on to be appealed, and I couldn't find a lot of information about it, but I think this case and the previous case are in the same boat, where both of them did not, the court ruled against both of them, claiming that this was not cruel and unusual punishment. And the impact of this case is that other federal appeal courts have since followed Hall in corporal punishment cases involving schools, although the high standard was proved very difficult for plaintiffs to meet. In cases where plaintiffs have been successful, the conduct of the educator is often rather extreme. So basically, in order for it to be considered cruel and unusual punishment, it has to be extreme. It probably has to cause severe injury. Basically, it can't just be used for discipline. There has to be more to it. In summary, if a state or district prohibits the use of corporal punishment, then teachers can be disciplined or discharged for violating these provisions. And like we've discussed before, this is left up to the overall states. There have also been civil assault and battery suits that have come from this. Suggestions for using corporal punishment: just notify the student, let them know what's happening, ask another staff member to witness, and provide parents with a written explanation for their punishment.